The pounding on my front door was sharp, rapid, and laced with the kind of entitlement only one person in this neighborhood carried like a badge of honor. "Open up! We need to talk about your yard. Now!" It was 9:15 p.m., long past the polite hours of neighborly visits. My husband, Jack, had just set his boots by the door and settled into the couch. He glanced at me, calm as always, but the tightness in his jaw told me he was already bracing for what was on the other side. I pulled the curtain back just a sliver. Standing under the porch light, clutching a thick binder against her chest, was Karen Whitfield, the self-appointed queen of our HOA. She wasn't just the president, she treated every cul-de-sac, hedge, and mailbox like her personal kingdom. And tonight, her kingdom had apparently been threatened by us. I whispered, "It's her." Jack's lips curved into the faintest smile, not of amusement, of recognition. He'd dealt with bigger bullies before. Karen was just another type of adversary. Still, I felt my pulse quicken as I opened the door just an inch. Karen didn't wait for an invitation. She shoved the door wide with the edge of her binder, stepping into our foyer like she owned the deed. "This," she said, slapping a piece of paper onto our entry table, "is your third violation notice. Your flagpole is non-compliant, and the fines will double if you don't take it down immediately." Jack rose from the couch, tall, broad-shouldered, his presence alone filling the room with quiet authority. He didn't need to speak yet. Karen hadn't even realized she'd just walked into a minefield. I picked up the notice. The date was wrong. The citation code didn't even exist. A fabricated fine. Typical Karen tactic. Jack finally spoke, his voice low, even, and terrifyingly steady. "You've got exactly 5 seconds to step back outside my house." Karen blinked at him, unfazed. She leaned in, her perfume sharp, her voice sharper. "You think you're above the rules because of your career history? This community belongs to me. Either comply or I'll make sure you regret it." I felt the temperature drop. Karen didn't know it yet, but she'd just crossed into hostile territory. And then, before Jack could answer, headlights swept across our living room window. A black SUV idled at the curb, engine running, lights cutting straight through the blinds. Something told me this was just the beginning. The SUV's engine growled low, a sound that didn't belong in our quiet cul-de-sac. Its headlights held steady on our front window, like a spotlight meant to intimidate. Karen's smirk widened, as if she'd been waiting for this exact moment. "Oh, good," she said, voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "The rest of the board is here." Jack moved closer to the door, his posture controlled, deliberate. I'd seen him move like that before, every step measured, every motion purposeful. He wasn't just walking, he was assessing. The SUV door opened. 2 men stepped out, not neighbors I recognized. They wore dark polo shirts with generic embroidered badges that looked official from a distance but fell apart under scrutiny. Fake inspectors. My stomach knotted. Karen brushed past me, calling out, "Over here! They need to see this non-compliant property for themselves." Jack caught her wrist, not harshly, but with enough force to halt her mid-stride. "You're not walking deeper into my home." Her lips curled. "You can't stop me. This is HOA business." Jack's voice was a blade, quiet, precise. "This is my house. Step outside, now." She yanked free and stormed onto the porch. The 2 so-called inspectors approached, clipboards in hand, eyes sweeping our property like predators marking territory. I followed Jack to the doorway. My hands were shaking, but his were sus. Teddy, arms crossed over his chest. One of the men scribbled something on a form. "Violation of Article 12, he muttered, loud enough for us to hear. Karen clapped her hands like a conductor directing her orchestra. "You see? Documentation, you're finished." Jack leaned against the doorframe, unimpressed. "That's not a real statute. I've read your bylaws cover to cover." His voice carried, deep enough that neighbors cracked blinds, faces appearing in the glow of porch lights. Watching, waiting. Some shook their heads, unwilling to intervene. Others looked eager, hungry for drama. That was Karen's power. She thrived on fear and spectacle. I spoke up, louder than I expected. "What would you do if your HOA tried this? Would you stay quiet or fight back?" The inspector scribbled again. Karen grabbed one clipboard and waved it toward the neighbors. "They refuse compliance. They're endangering property values." Gasps spread like wildfire down the street. Rumors would follow by morning. Jack stepped forward, roaring over Karen. Enough. You've got one last chance to leave this property. Take it. The SUV's engine revved again. More doors opened. Shadows spilled onto the pavement. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. This was an escalation. The sound of car doors slamming echoed like gunshots down the cul-de-sac. 3 more figures stepped out of the SUV, all dressed in the same dark polos, each wearing the same knockoff badge clipped to their belts. They weren't neighbors. They weren't officials. They were muscle, brought here to scare us into submission. Karen crossed her arms, triumphant. This is what happens when you defy the board. You've brought this on yourselves. Jack's hand brushed my arm gently, a signal we'd developed over years. Stay calm, stay behind me. His eyes flicked from figure to figure, cataloging posture, distance, potential threats. He was in his element. The men fanned out across our lawn. One rattled the gate to our backyard. Another traced his flashlight beam along the flagpole Karen hated so much. The third walked right up our steps and peered inside like he had every right to inspect our home. I heard the faint creak of our fence giving under pressure. My breath caught. They weren't just here to scare us. They were testing boundaries. Jack's voice boomed across the yard. Step away from my property. The one at the flagpole sneered. We're within our rights. Article 21. There is no Article 21, Jack cut in, his tone razor sharp. I've read your playbook. This isn't compliance, it's trespassing. Neighbors' blinds shifted again. A few cell phones lifted, recording. The board wanted a spectacle, but they hadn't counted on an audience turning into witnesses. Karen snapped her fingers at the so-called inspectors. Document everything. We'll hit them with maximum fines. And if they resist, well, we'll escalate further. Her smile said she was enjoying every second. One of the men stepped closer to Jack, chest puffed, trying to loom. You really want this to get physical? Jack didn't flinch. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a controlled whisper that still carried in the silence. Son, you don't want to find out who you're squaring up against. The man hesitated, just long enough for Jack to know he'd planted doubt. Then, crack. The sound of wood splintering shot through the night. Someone had forced open the side gate. My heart lurched. I darted toward the window, catching sight of a figure slipping into our backyard, flashlight cutting across the grass. Trespass had turned into invasion. Jack's head turned slowly, every muscle taut. He looked at me, then back to the intruders, his voice steady. Stay inside. Lock the doors. The standoff was seconds from igniting. The splintered gate creaked again as another shadow slipped into our backyard. My pulse hammered, but Jack didn't move with fear. He moved with precision. And he stepped onto the porch, shoulders squared, his frame filling the doorway like a barricade. Karen lifted her chin, emboldened by the muscle she'd brought. Remove the flagpole. Tear it down if you have to. This family needs to learn who's in charge. Her voice carried, loud enough for every neighbor watching from the dark. Jack tilted his head, studying the men circling our property. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You've got 10 seconds to leave before you start racking up felonies. Trespassing, harassment, impersonation. He paused, eyes narrowing. And that's before I add breaking and entering. One of the men snorted. What are you gonna do? Call the cops? He jabbed a finger into Jack's chest. We are the cops tonight. It was the wrong move. In a flash, Jack's hand snapped up, twisting the man's wrist and forcing him to his knees. The clipboard clattered against the concrete. Jack's voice cut through the night, cold and commanding. Hands where I can see them. Now. The other 2 men froze, suddenly unsure. Their fake bravado cracked when they realized Jack wasn't a suburban pushover. He was trained, disciplined, and utterly in control. Karen shrieked, You can't touch them! This is an HOA-sanctioned inspection! Jack's eyes burned into hers. Lady, you brought wolves into my yard, and you forgot. I used to hunt wolves for a living. The crowd of neighbors gasped. A few whispered. One woman whispered loud enough for all to hear. He's ex-Navy SEAL. The men shifted uneasily, backing toward the curb. But the one Jack pinned cried out in pain, forcing the others to step forward again. For a split second, it looked like they'd rush him. Jack didn't blink. Try it. You'll regret it. They hesitated, fear replacing arrogance. The man in the backyard reappeared, realizing he was outmatched, and bolted for the SUV. Karen was still screaming, her voice shrill, cracking under pressure. You'll regret this. You're finished. This whole neighborhood will turn against you. Jack released the pinned man, shoving him hard toward the others. He landed in a heap, groaning, clutching his arm. Jack straightened, his silhouette framed in the porch light, his words ringing like a trailer line from a war film. They thought they could break me, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. And then, red and blue lights strobed against the houses. Sirens cut through the night. The real police had arrived. The wail of sirens shattered the cul-de-sac's silence. Red and blue lights strobed across manicured lawns as two squad cars rolled up, tires crunching against the curb. Neighbors who had been hiding behind blinds now stood openly on their porches, drawn like moths to the chaos. The fake inspectors froze where they stood, caught in the flood of headlights. Karen's triumphant smirk faltered for the first time all night. She stammered, pointing at Jack. "Arrest him! He assaulted one of my board members." The first officer stepped out, hand on his holster, eyes scanning the scene. Jack raised his hands slowly, calm and composed. "Officer, these individuals have trespassed on private property, impersonated officials, and attempted to break into my home. My security cameras caught everything." The officer's gaze shifted to the crumpled clipboard on the ground, the cheap knockoff badges glinting under the light. He frowned, signaling to his partner. "Check those IDs." One by one, the men were lined up against the SUV. The officers examined the badges, shook their heads, and cuffed the ringleaders without hesitation. Impersonation of law enforcement was no small crime. Karen shrieked, voice rising to a pitch that made even the officers wince. "You can't do this. I am the HOA President. This whole community answers to me." The officer gave her a look that sliced through her delusion. "Ma'am, the only thing you're answering to tonight is the law." He gestured to another unit pulling up. "You're coming with us for harassment, conspiracy, and filing false documents." Her face drained of color. For the first time since I'd met Karen Whitfield, she was speechless. The crowd of neighbors erupted into whispers, some clapping quietly, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Jack lowered his hands, calm as ever, and stepped back inside to retrieve the flash drive from our security system. When he returned, he handed it to the officer like evidence on a battlefield. "Everything you need is on here. Timestamps, audio, video. It's airtight." The officer nodded, almost respectfully. "You just saved us a lot of time." As Karen was led to the back of a cruiser, she locked eyes with me, her fury twisting into something hollow. "This isn't over," she hissed. But we both knew it was. By dawn, the SUV was towed, the imposters booked, and Karen stripped of her title. The HOA board dissolved under investigation, its bylaws scrutinized and dismantled. Neighbors who had lived under her thumb for years finally exhaled. Weeks later, the sign that once declared Whispering Pines HOA was gone. In its place stood nothing but open grass. For the first time since moving in, I felt peace settle over our home. As the sun set over the cul-de-sac, the only sound left was silence, the kind of silence you earn after a battle won.